The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on rigorous strategic thinking, avoiding knee-jerk reactions. Our presenter, James Graham, is here and he's just waiting to start. But just before I hand over to him, I'd just like to talk you through some housekeeping tips that will just help the afternoon go smoothly. The slides that you see, as well as the recording of the entire webinar, will be available on our SlideShare page, as well as our YouTube channel. And we will send you an email with the links to this as soon as we can. Please allow up to a week for it. When the webinar is over, a survey will pop up, and I just ask that you please take some time to give us your feedback and help us improve things. As you're listening to James speaking, you might have some questions, and if you look to the bottom right of your control panel, you'll see a little chat box, and this is where you can communicate with us. So if you've got a question that you want to ask, just type it in there, and James will allocate time at the end to answer your questions. So with that said, I'll just hand you over now, and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on board delivering this seminar about strategic thinking. So just let me give you a very short introduction of myself. My name is James Graham. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I've had a mixed career. I started off in senior management with multinational companies in the sales and marketing space for 12 years, and then I went into management consulting in 1993. I still do that. I also now facilitate learning and development seminars for Informa in the GCC region. I've got global experience, as you can see, and my speciality is around formulating strategies and executing them successfully. So for the past 35 years, I've done a lot of strategic thinking, and I'm going to hope to share with you today some of the lessons that I've learned over the years. So today's agenda, very quickly. Firstly, background and context to strategic thinking, the risk of knee-jerk reactions and the problems that arise from incorrect responses. We're going to have a look at observing market-related events, how to make sense of them, how to collate groups of events together to give us the ability to hypothesize what's happening. We can interpret then what's happening, decide how to respond, identify our provisional responses, assess which of the provisional responses has the best fit with the problem. We can then progressively elaborate a solution to solve the problem, which we then implement. So after I've covered all of those ideas, we'll then have a question and answer session where you are welcome to type in questions into the text box, and I will answer those as best I can. So don't wait till the end. If you have any questions that you think of as we go through, please type them into the text box there and then, and we'll pick them up at the end. So let's get started. Firstly, the title of the seminar includes the comment about knee-jerk reactions. It's worth starting off and investigating what we mean by a knee-jerk reaction. As you can see from the diagram on the slide here, in clinical terms, a knee-jerk reaction is when a doctor strikes a patient on the patella ligament by the knee and the bottom half of the leg jerks up automatically. That's a metaphor in business for doing something very, very quickly without thinking and making a decision that we later come to regret because we didn't put enough thought into that. Now, today, to give an example of a knee-jerk reaction that had pretty bad consequences, we're going to go back to the internet boom, so-called dot-com boom, in the late 1990s. As it says on the slide here, there was a tremendous burst of activity where anything with .com after it on a business case attracted an enormous amount of investment because people were frightened of being left behind by a new and exciting and scary business area that nobody really understood. So what happened, a lot of decisions were taken, knee-jerk decisions, to make investments, in many cases huge investments, in business propositions that often were not fully understood. And when the boom came to the end, it was estimated that $5 trillion of tech company investment just evaporated into thin air. Very difficult situation when a market opportunity comes along and you're not quite sure. You're concerned if you take too much time to think about it, you'll miss the boat. On the other hand, if you make decisions too quickly without understanding the consequences of what you're doing, it could end up in a very, very bad situation. So let's start off by looking at a case study. This website page, which you're seeing in front of you now, dates back to 1999. And it's the website of a company called Boo.com. Boo.com was a very innovative attempt to set up a fashion/sportswear internet business with usual mail services fulfillment, almost like an electronic catalogue to sell clothes to people. Now, to be fair to Boo.com, the idea was good. If you look today on the internet, you'll see a lot of businesses in this kind of business. Amazon.com, for one, springs to mind. But in 1999, it was very, very much a virgin market. It was a greenfield market. People really didn't know too much about it or how to make it work. So what we're going to have a look at is Boo.com and what happened. So some background and context. Boo was formed in 1998 by two Swedish expats living in London. It opened in 1999 and it closed in 2000. So it had a very, very brief life cycle during which its star burnt brightly but ultimately failed spectacularly. The investment within the organization was $130 million. And when the company failed, that was all lost, unfortunately. One of the major problems with the business model at that time was speed of connection. These days, we all take for granted our multi-megabit broadband connections. But back in 1999, most users were dialing up with 64K modems or even 32K modems. Very, very slow devices. And clearly one of the problems with Boo.com was that the screen access was slow because of this. And people were literally dropping out and disconnecting because the screens were taking too long to load. So Boo.com was by no means unusual in being an organization that launched on the crest of a wave and then failed on the subsequent crest of that wave. I mean, inherently, it was a good idea. I think most people would say, the idea was good, the time was right, the idea was scalable. So why did it fail? Well, one of the reasons it failed is that when Boo were looking at the market, they rather overstated what's called first mover advantage. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes in the next slide. But first mover advantage generally means if you get to market before anybody else, you will reap the greatest benefits. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Because Boo wanted to get to market very quickly, they had extremely aggressive plans in terms of expansion. For example, they launched together in the UK and the US, and then they launched other markets very, very quickly. Whereas Amazon.com, for example, they opened in the US market and slowly but surely then expanded out to other markets. Because Boo.com had a very aggressive policy, that meant they had to make a lot of expensive investments early in the game. And also their operating expenses were high because they ramped up their personnel and other costs very, very quickly. Sadly, the conversion rate of visits to sale was extremely low, literally in the range of 1 to 3%, depending on which data you look at. And this was very much thought to be a consequence of the slow page loads, meaning that people were being bored and eventually would drop out, and although they may have seen products that were interesting, they didn't have the patience to follow those through to checkout, or checkout would fail because of the slow uploads. As a consequence, the revenue profile at Boo.com came in well under the initial plan, and the firm simply ran out of cash. And as we all know, when you run out of cash in business, it's the end of the line. Cash is king, and unfortunately, Boo.com couldn't raise any finance. They came to the final day, the CEO made an announcement, unless I raise $20 million by tonight, Boo.com is finished. Sadly, they failed to meet that target and did actually have to close the doors. So I mentioned earlier that they overstated first mover advantage. Let's just explore that in a little bit more detail. Now, first mover status, as it's known in the market, is often stated to be a universally good thing. If you get there first, you achieve the best market position, you'll have the best revenues, you'll be able to get more share, basically you'll do better than your competition. However, if you look at various research which has been done on this subject, and in particular, I'm citing a Harvard Business Review paper in the bottom of this page, you'll find that it's not quite as simple as that. A lot of first mover advantage is derived from having products which mature relatively slowly. So if we look at, for example, the vacuum cleaner or the Hoover, as people often refer to it, although the design has changed over the past 70, 80 years, in comparison to, say, aircraft design, which when the first Hoovers were invented, we were traveling around in biplanes with propeller-driven engines, to today where we fly around in A380s, which are almost like flying hotels. The Hoover hasn't changed that much. It still draws air in through a pipe and a brush, and it either stores the waste in a bag, which was the original Hoover design, or these days you get some bagless designs. Yes, James Dyson and his company invented the principle of the cyclone-driven bag-free Hoovers a few years ago, but nonetheless, the concept is pretty much the same as it was back in the 1930s. That meant that the upfront work Hoover did in creating a brand and building on that brand still makes them today a key player in that market. They have a very, very strong brand. Literally their first mover advantage was very, very clear. At the same time, when you're going into markets where there's more potential for disruptive innovation, and anything to do with IT is pretty much accepted to be an innovative, fast-moving market, then your first mover advantage can rapidly be overtaken by technology or better products that outstrip yours. If you look, for example, in the smartphone market, Motorola were the original smartphone company, then overtaken by Nokia. These days, Samsung, Apple, possibly BlackBerry, although BlackBerry may also be on the down curve as well, would be the key players. So first mover advantage is possibly less important in a disruptive market than it is in a slow static, slowly developing market. And really what happened with Boo.com, in the time that they were trying to establish their website, develop it, expand it, other competitors were also able to come in and pick up and take market share from them. So the whole of Boo's problem really came from very, very aggressive growth plans that never quite happened, leading to them running out of cash and going out of business. Now, the knee-jerk in overestimating first mover advantage is simply assuming that because you get there first, you'll get the best position in the market and you'll have a sustainable advantage. That may or may not be the case. It's one of the things you're going to have to look at as you do your assessment and strategic thinking. Talking of strategic thinking, let's have a look at how we often make decisions in business. Quite often, people will observe some kind of market phenomena. They will have an intuitive reaction. Oh my goodness, something is happening. We've got to react. We've got to do something about that. And they'll come up with an intuitive idea which they'll start to execute. And sometimes if their intuition is strong enough, they may get a very good result. But frankly, quite often, the intuition will not be balanced with enough data. The knee-jerk reaction will unfortunately not be the right decision and they'll get a bad outcome. So what should we do when we notice something in the market? Well, for a start, the observation is still the entry point. But rather than having an immediate intuitive reaction, we need to start noting and collating the events in the market that we're seeing. In other words, listing them down by type so that we can see what exactly is happening out there. We can start to look for patterns and we can start to see whether we think these are random events or there's some kind of correlated activity going out there that we need to investigate and understand more. Once that investigation has been interpreted and we've got some ideas about what this means, we then have to think very carefully about how to decide to respond. So in the event of competitor activity, do we respond by pushing back? Do we respond by trying to find a different market niche where we've got a blue ocean advantage? How do we do that exactly? Once we've made some kind of decision on basic response, we then have to put together some thinking around what those responses may be. What I call here provisional responses. Provisional responses are responses that we think are feasible, but we haven't as yet assessed for best fit with the market. But in other words, we're giving ourselves some options. We may have a fast but low quality response. We may have a medium term, high quality response, or we may have different responses, and we want to work with colleagues to try and assess which the best fit is for that response. When we're assessing, we'll be looking at things like cost, speed of execution, implication on market conditions, cannibalization of existing products, many, many different factors, all of which will need to be considered before we decide what to do. When we've decided what the best response is and we've evaluated that choice, then we get into what's known as progressively elaborating the solution. Progressive elaboration means to take the idea and to start to build on top of that things like the methodology, put together some fairly clear plans and key milestones, key outcomes, key deliverables, and come up with a plan that we then execute and put into the market. Now, we don't want to fall into the trap of paralysis by analysis, which means that we've spent too much time going through this thinking cycle. Paralysis by analysis inevitably means someone may well get in and be able to take advantage of market changes to our detriment. But equally, we want to do enough rigorous thinking to avoid a knee-jerk reaction which could have disastrous consequences. In the next part of this webinar, I would like to move on to talking about how we go about doing this process in a little more detail. A starting point for rigorous strategic thinking is to have situational awareness. As a pilot friend of mine used to say, situational awareness is knowing where the mountains and the clouds are and staying well clear. In the situation of a commercial organisation, we need to understand things like our business context, our organisation, what are our strengths and weaknesses, our capabilities, products and service offerings, and the markets that we choose to play in, markets that we choose not to play in. We then need to be aware of our constraints. These will be things like our capability. How does our value chain work versus how does our competitors' value chain work? What about financing? Because new strategic initiatives can often take a lot of financing. And then we've got the classic pest or pest lead factors, such as the political stability of our markets, the economic conditions, social trends, technological developments such as disruptive technologies, any legal constraints or implications, environmental constraints, international constraints such as different working hours, time zones, different days of the week, or indeed any demographic constraints, and understanding the things that will prevent us from doing exactly what we want to do. We then need to have some considerations such as what problems and opportunities exist in our world, what actions required to take advantage of those opportunities, and what are our objectives in the short and medium term. We need to be aware of challenges such as our competitor and their competitor strategies, the market velocity, in other words, how quickly does it change, how adaptable do we need to be, what are the implementation costs of any plans that we put together, and what changes may be required in altering the way that we do business, because changes often have implications for execution, such as getting engagement and buy-in from our people, internally or externally in the shape of distributors or agents. Finally, we need to be aware of the choices that we may wish to make, such as in our generic strategy. For example, do we want to be a highly differentiated niche player commanding very high prices for small volumes, or would we rather go in with a market cost focus and try and have the lowest cost base to give us the opportunity to either use pricing elasticity as a mechanism or to make larger margins than our competitors? Do we see our market being red ocean or blue ocean? Red ocean is a highly competitive market with like-for-like offers, and blue ocean is more differentiated, where we've achieved a space where nobody can compete with us for either technical reasons, or we have a patent, or we got there first, and in this case there was a sustainable first mover advantage. We may also want to choose what market position we fit in, and then what benefits and risks do we want to take and make in achieving that status. So as you can see, quite a lot of considerations in the 5 C's, and these are things that we need to do, and we need to be pretty good at keeping the background information in there up to date, so that when we do need to do some strategic thinking, we're able to leverage the existing knowledge quickly without having to spend a lot of time doing strategic audits or other audits to get the information. If we have that information to hand, it's going to be much easier to make decisions quickly. So let's now talk about the process steps in the slide I showed a few minutes ago that help us to avoid knee-jerk reactions. In observing market-related events, it's very important that we capture and note what kind of events we're seeing. And the reason that's important is because we may get a lot of information from the market at one time. Very often we'll be getting lots of primary data feedback from our salespeople, from our customer service people, from any other customer facing people. We're getting secondary data from trade journals or television programs or newspaper reports. So we're in a danger of overload, and what we need to do is sift out the important events from the background noise. Now, I've noted down here 4 types of events that we may notice concurrently. We have a competitor giving a larger than normal discount to a number of customers. We have that same competitor launching new products. At the same time, we have a customer key account switching to another firm from us due to an unresolved complaint, feeling they weren't being treated satisfactorily. And then we have a trend that sees complaints rising 25% above average for 3 months. So there's quite a lot of information there. And rather than having a knee-jerk reaction to each one of those, we need to collate the information and then do some structured thinking. Now, it seems when you look at the data we've just looked at, there are 2 strong themes which arise. One of them is competitor aggression, discounting heavily and launching new products. That means they're going out to try and take share from other players in the market. And then the customer service complaints seem to say that we're not doing a very good job there. So it's quite important that we collate, we understand those things, and then we are able to look at the information, collect data, investigate the customer service problems, find out what's going on, and we decide how to respond. So some typical responses would be in terms of responding to the competitor attack. We could launch a promotional campaign on our existing products, and we could offer 2-for-1 products, for example, if we're offering fast-moving consumer goods. In a business-to-business situation, we might offer some kind of discount on sales completed in the next 2 months. We may try in a service business to try and tie people in to longer term contracts in response to us offering them a better deal. Those would be reasonable things to do. On the other hand, we may just decide to maintain our margins and let the competitor take some share. If we believe that the competitor can't sustain their pricing advantage for too long, let them steal some customers, and then when the storm's blown out, we can go back and try and re-recruit those customers and get them back to our company. We also might decide that we have to respond by launching new products. And also there may be many other options that we had, but those are just 3 initial ideas. In terms of customer service, we might decide to introduce some Six Sigma work to look at deviation from our customer standards and bring in some kind of statistical analysis of complaints and try and identify where the problems are arising and fix the problems so they don't happen again. That would be a good thing to do. Equally, we may want to compensate customers to try and retain their loyalty and do some service recovery. We may also want to launch some kind of advertising campaign when we fix the problem, just to alert people to the fact our customer service is very good and to try and recalibrate and reset everybody's perceptions. Now, I've already suggested some ideas that we could implement to respond to what we see in the market. The thinking process around that would be on things like, well, what options are available to us? What do we know about each option in terms of risk, in terms of potential effectiveness? How much would it cost for us to put that response into place? How long would it take? Is it a quick fix, for example, a flash sales promotion? Or may we have a permanent solution such as introducing a new product? Have we got people with the skills to do what we want to do? And have we got the people, resources and materials to do it? There may be some other questions you'd like to ask yourself as well, such as, is it legally compliant in different jurisdictions? Or is this a wise decision in the economy prevailing? Nonetheless, you can see here that there are some fairly rigorous questions we can ask ourselves in order to shape our thinking and to make sure that our responses are not knee-jerk responses, but in fact are structured responses that are the right response to the situation. And I'd be very, very clear in saying that knee-jerk responses are usually bad. Structured responses, however, don't need to be slow, as long as you have your 5 C's up to date, and so long as you're prepared to sit down and do some very hard thinking and open talking with colleagues. Rigorous thinking can be fast, it can be responsive, and it's got a far higher probability of being successful than knee-jerk intuition. So when we want to assess the best fit responses from the options we get, what kind of questions would we like to ask there? Here are some thoughts. What are the benefits? In other words, what extra revenues, what profit do we get? Benefit could even be holding market share or taking market share from competitors. Are there any risks in doing this? So for example, if we launch a sales promotion, may that depress market price points and make it difficult to react to them later? How will our competitors respond to our action? Could we get into a price war with tit-for-tat discounts forever, which is probably to no one's benefit rather than the consumer? When we look at our options, are they affordable? There may be a fantastic option, but we simply can't finance that. Are they feasible? Are they going to work with what we have now in terms of people, organizational processes and products? And very important, are the options available in the time needed? Can we respond quickly enough? You know, once again, there may be a number of different questions that you'd like to add to these questions, depending on your markets and market implications, but these would be a starting point for a fairly robust set of questions that you might want to ask yourself. Now, when you've assessed your best fit, we want to get into progressively elaborating the solution to make sure it's fit for purpose. So simply we look at the best fit response that we've looked at so far, and we start thinking about how to plan the implementation. So we have to be very careful to define the product or service that we're going to create down in some detail. That will then allow us to identify the scope of work that is required in order to create that new product or service. We need to create a timeline. So when can we get this to market? Then a budget for cost, and obviously as we're producing this, we may see certain risks emerge, such as what if we're late, or what if the scope of work proves to be not feasible. Then we'd need some risk responses positioned to deal with that to make sure we could get back on track fairly quickly. Then we need to think about implementing the solution. At this stage, we're almost getting into the project management space. But strategic formulation, strategic execution should work together, and part of strategic execution is project management. So we need to have sponsors, people in place to give authority and funding to what we're doing, certainly at senior level, but also at business unit level or divisional level, to make sure that our new initiatives get on the business agenda and are supported and stay on that, and don't disappear in the background noises of the business as usual. We clearly then need to plan the changes within the organization. This is very, very important. And when we've done that, that will allow us to identify the impact on the business, which we can analyze. So if we're bringing in a new product, what does that mean in terms of production capacity, design capacity, logistics, warehouse space, shipping? You know, all of these things have got to be dealt with properly. We need to also think about how to communicate these changes across the business. Obviously, we're going to plan them first, but then communicate them to colleagues. One of the reasons new initiatives sometimes fail is through lack of communication or lack of visibility. And finally, we've got to monitor progress, make sure that we deal with any deviations as soon as possible and get back on track. So that's pretty much my thoughts about how we think rigorously and avoid knee-jerk reactions, just to reassure anybody listening in that this kind of approach does work. Here are some of the original businesses who started around the time that boo.com started. So Amazon.com, we don't need to say any more about Amazon, everybody knows Amazon. Netflix, who started out as a video rental or videotape rental business, now a very, very respected and profitable online subscription company. eBay, the world's leading auction and reseller. Coupons.com, who supply discount codes. Priceline initially started off with airline flights, but then found a sweet spot in the hotels business, allowing you to bid and get good deals on hotel rooms. And Shutterfly, a company who sells stock images using the internet as their medium. All of these companies have been phenomenally successful and all have a reputation for good strategic planning. So we hope that that gives you some reassurance that these tools and techniques do work and they do achieve success. So at this stage now, I'd like to open the floor across to colleagues on the webinar and ask people if they have any questions they'd like to ask. So the first question is there a formula that works every time for avoiding knee-jerk reaction? Interesting question. I guess it depends how you define formula. If you define formula as a series of high-level steps, such as the ones that I've just outlined in this webinar, then yes, I would say, the process I've just outlined or something similar will work, will give you repeatable success. Where I think the challenge lies, if you go down into very, very detailed level and you try and describe precisely every question to ask in every context, then that's going to be much harder to do because every business is different, every market is different, and that probably wouldn't work at that level. So the answer to your question is kind of, but at the higher level rather than the lower level of detail. Okay, the next question. What are the biggest blockers to stopping knee-jerk reaction? I think one of the biggest drivers or causes of knee-jerk reaction is that people see things in the market and are shocked. Oh my goodness, this has happened. We need to do something. Let's do something right now. Psychologically, that really impacts people and you get an emotional reaction to the observation. That emotional reaction drives a very strong psychological need to do something. And as we all know, when people react emotionally, the reaction is not necessarily very cool, calm and collective and thought through. So my advice on that would be, when something happens in the market, although it may be shocking, try not to react immediately. Try and just gather the facts, collate the data, and then only respond when you've thought through and you think that you've got enough information to have a structured response. So don't let intuition override analysis. They work best when you keep them in a partnership of equals. So I think we've got time for just one more question. And the final question is, how important is first mover advantage generally? Well, that is something that's very, very important to organizations. In particular, first mover advantage can get you very, very long-term returns in a stable market. Where you were first to market, you'll be able to develop a brand that's stronger than your competition because it's been around for longer, it's sustainable, it's more profitable. And those are the circumstances where I think it will be very important. In shorter term, more disruptive markets, it's arguably less important, although I hate to say dogmatically it never is, because life teaches me every day new lessons, and it may well be that there are situations where first mover advantage also works for tech companies. But whilst I'm answering this question, if anybody is interested in first mover advantage and getting to market quickly, I am doing another webinar next month in November, which Informa will put up on the website and we'll send around by email mail shots. If you're interested in that, please feel free to join that webinar and we can have a look at the topic in more detail and also an assessment framework to look at first mover advantage. So let me draw the webinar to a close by just saying I'm doing a couple of programs in Dubai in the near future, or at least one of them in the near future. If anybody wants to look at some strategic thinking and planning techniques, you're very welcome to join us at the Jumeirah Emirates Tower. And then July next year, we'll be doing a program on analysing and documenting policies and procedures, which is a very, very strong component of formulating and executing strategies. Don't forget to complete the poll on the exit, please, to give us your feedback. But in the meantime, from Shuri and myself, James Graham, we'd like to say thank you very much for coming to the webinar. Wish you a good rest of the day, and inshallah speak to you again sometime.